Is that bicarb?
Bicarb, yeah.
Okay.
What else do you want?
You giving any epi?
You want epinephrine?
Yeah. Give an amp of epinephrine right now. Good. 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 See these breathing. Quarters respiration. I'm going to tube them anyway. All right, scoot them up here, please. Let's bring them up here so I can tube them. Bring them up. There we go. Good. Okay, step back.
Another bicarb?
That's not a very strong.
This is 400.
It looks 400. It said on 400.
What's the guy going up here?
400, yeah.
All right, I'm right in.
Okay, let's
Blow it up.
okay.
Do we have a stethoscope?
Atropine. I'm on done bicarb. Two things of atropine. And what? What else? Isopropyl.
Okay. Pull it back a bit. Okay. All right. Tape it down.
Yes, somebody just called the family.
I haven't.
Hey, give him an amp of epinephrine, please.
You want it IV?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's try another bicarb too.
Only put another one in.
Yeah, I don't know where the full one is.
How is that IV? It's no good or what?
Yeah,
okay,
Okay, well, that's
You
okay.
can't give everything in the same one. That's
Okay, charge it.
Lily, if I could just take this, please. Yeah. Okay.
See if we've got anything. See if It looks like he's in flying fit.
Needs to be sectioned down.
We're gonna start an IV on this side. Could you give me an IV tray so I can start? Okay. Okay, get it close up here. Suck your mouth. You know what you're sucking on.
Okay.
Is that the second ambulance?
yes.
Yeah.
Give me a blood gas here.
Calcium is in.
Looks.
Did anybody call the family?
She's calling them now. You want to talk to them, Bill?
Well, just tell them they can come right.
Strong syrup, yes. And I'll start it in the back.
Give another amplifier card.
We have, yeah, we have.
Do you have any bicarb?
These hyperventilators could, you know, help a little bit with correcting acidosis.
I'll get a blood gas.
Turn that off.
I'm just thinking another ample bicarb.
Yeah. Let's put another one on the other side.
Okay, let's try them again as soon as they finish it.
Sure. Let's put the sample right there.
Is the machine charged up now?
How do you deal with sudden death in an emergency situation? I would imagine that a lot of times you have deaths which are sudden deaths, accidents or heart attacks that are people are not prepared for.
That's interesting. That's the hardest thing that I run into in an emergency setting. It's one thing to tell a family that's been prepared for a death for a long period of time and a chronic illness that their loved one is gone. It's a relief. But when you rush in someone who hasn't been previously ill, or a small child who's been struck by an automobile, and then have to go out and tell the family that the child or their husband or their wife is suddenly dead, no more there, it comes as an incredible shock, and there's no way you can prepare the family, you know. Unfortunately, we haven't got the setting here to really ease the family into the setting. I feel like sometimes that when I go out to talk to the family and I tell them that news, that I suddenly am invisible in their eyes. I mean, they're left with their grief, and it was as if I weren't there, as if I should somehow dissolve into the wall and you know, never exist or something. It's very difficult.
How do you prepare yourself to deal with seeing?
Well, you keep your fingers crossed that doesn't come on when you're covering, but sometimes there's a real no way to prepare for it, I guess, just because we see the whole spectrum, you know, of things, and sometimes you're just not mentally or physically prepared for death, and sometimes it hits you just as strongly as it you might expect to hit any other person who comes off of the street. I remember one day I had 2 deaths in a row, and both situations I had to go out and tell the family. One was a 75-year-old woman, and I had to go out and tell the husband, and he was sitting in his chair waiting for me to come out, and I went out, and she died in the emergency room. She, as a matter of fact, was dead when she got into the, by the time she got to us, and he got in afterwards and was waiting in the waiting room, and I went out to talk to him, and I said, "Mr. Smith," and he said, yes, doctor, yes," because he was waiting for the good news. And I said, "I'm afraid she's passed away," you know, using whatever euphemism that I could possibly come up with, and he just completely decompensated. It was as if he had tried to tear the walls down, and he pushed me away. He pushed me away. He didn't want to have anything to do, and he was flailing his arms around. 78-year-old man, you know, how do you tell something like that? And he was all alone, you know. And then about 3 hours later, I got another one in, you know, same thing.
Have you had incidences where people have actually blamed you for the death of their...
No, not usually. I've had situations where they're looking for someone to blame.
And you're the first point of contact.
But generally, people are pretty reasonable about that, you know. I can put a little lidocaine in there. August 7th, 1976. We attempt resuscitation on a 55-year-old white male who has fallen 60 feet from a scaffold and is rushed to the emergency room in full cardiac arrest. Our efforts seem to be failing. Having recently read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross regarding descriptions of life after death, and thinking of this man's family possibly waiting outside, I say a prayer to myself and call out to the man's spirit, asking him to come back. The cardioscope shows a rhythm, and I notice his left hand begins twitching. His mouth moves, and his eyes begin to blink. But his cardiac rhythm soon goes back into an irreversible flat line, and the movements cease. I double my efforts without success, and I must finally pronounce him dead. Telling the family is always the most difficult task, and I am relieved somewhat to learn that the man has no family. Later I reflect that perhaps this man had somehow shared with me the responsibility of ending our resuscitation efforts.
Give me another bike card.
Okay, folks, see what we got.
Try one more.
Anything? Yep. Is it charged?
Yeah.
You look good. But
Come in, Father.
Back in food.
it's like more like 100 and
Still tight, but
400.
it's still reaching around.
No, because he was fibrillating.
All right, well. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the big gun is. So they went in looking. thought it was a ruptured aneurysm, could not get message I got in the middle of surgery.
August 5th, 1976. A 23-year-old white male brought to the emergency room in full cardiac arrest after he electrocuted himself while working with an electric sander in his bathroom. Although he was probably dead on arrival, we worked on him for well over an hour, primarily because of his age, without the slightest response to our efforts. I suddenly realized, when I went outside, that his newlywed wife, who was waiting, knew nothing about the accident or its outcome. And when I told her, she decompensated, practically tearing off my shirt in her grief. January 7th, 1976. Witnessed a family fighting over the wallet of a deceased relative. May 30th, 1976. We attempt to resuscitate a man who has shot himself in the chest with a pistol. We are unsuccessful, and I must tell the family. I walk out to the waiting room and find a woman weeping. She is young and alone, and I am almost overwhelmed by her sadness. I go to her and I put my arm around her, attempting to comfort her. I tell her that he died quickly, that we did everything we could, that he probably didn't feel a thing. My nurse pulls me aside and tells me that this woman is not a relative, but a patient with a painful sty in her eye.